Chapter 19. Although as a woman of 13 I was freed from regular lessons with Simon, I still spent most of my time in the library. My betrothed continued his own historical studies, and as I learned more about history we found much to discuss, though I did not seek him out for the delight of his conversation or wit. He was also a warrior, but I found it difficult to imagine him on a horse in his long scholar's robes. This comfortable situation was not to last. Once again my father was called to war. By now I was used to this, so I felt no worry. Nicephorus Bryennius joined him, and I felt a twinge of relief at the prospect of spending time alone again. But after their departure I found myself with too much time and not enough to do. Absorbing though my readings were, I could not keep at them all day. It occurred to me that since my father was absent, my grandmother must be holding audiences in the throne room again. I wondered how John was faring at her side. I knew that I should stay away, but my curiosity was too strong. So, dressed in my finest robe and with as much jewelry as I felt necessary to indicate my status, I made my way down the familiar corridor. The door was flanked, as always, by burly guards in full armor. They must be new, I thought, as they did not bow at my approach. Rather, one moved to block the doorway. Surprised, I looked up at his face and saw that far from being a new recruit, this guard was a man known to me. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Do you not recognize me?" "You are the betrothed of Nicephorus Bryennius and sister to the heir," he replied, as though repeating words carefully rehearsed. I fought to keep from showing the shock I felt. Betrothed of? Sister to? Was I not the imperial princess Anna Porphyra Janita Comnena in my own right? "Let me by," I said, attempting to push past, but he stood firm and I could not dislodge him. "Move aside, I say. I will enter." I tried to squirm around him, but suddenly the other guard joined him and the two of them formed a barrier I could not cross. I cried out as one of them seized my wrist and dragged me from the door. "You dare," I gasped. "You dare lay a hand on the daughter of your emperor Alexius Comnenus? He will have your head. I will have your head." "Not likely," said a thin voice from the doorway. There were two figures, both robed in silk, both crowned. The smaller one who had spoken was my brother, the larger, my grandmother. Anna Dalasena wore a gleeful smile, and her wrinkled hand grasped the boy's shoulder. "You forgot your bow to the heir," she said. My head whirled and my stomach churned, and suddenly I felt I was going to vomit. I fought it back, fiercely forbidding myself to show any weakness. A bow was what they wanted, and a bow was what they would get. But I would face an executioner before I would prostrate myself full length on the floor. It is proper for a sister to nod to her brother, so that is what I did. "I hope I find you in health, little brother." If they had forbidden the guards to address me by my title, no power on earth could make me call the monkey your majesty. He looked at our grandmother, evidently confused. "Good," I said to myself. "You thought I would refuse. I know how to play chess too, grandmother. Only you would do well to plan your moves further in advance and expect the unexpected. Even though you've found someone to be your puppet, don't count on this half-wit to make any moves without your help." Before he had a chance to regain his composure, I asked, "What is the meaning of this? At whose orders will the guard not let me pass? Yours?" I addressed my grandmother. "No, mine," said John. "Yours? By what right?" "By right of proclamation," replied my grandmother. "Your father, as always, has decreed that while he is away at war, I am to decide all matters as though I were emperor. I have decided that the heir to the throne must start to learn his duties now. It is up to him who attends audiences, and he has decreed that you are not permitted in the throne room. You may return to your books." Without doubt, I was in check. But I was not checkmate. Surely my father would return soon. He had said that his latest trip was merely a short campaign to quell unrest along the borders. When he came back, he would make all right again. But this time he was gone 2 long years. And when he finally came home, I was not permitted to present my case to him, for he returned ill, borne on a litter by 4 slaves, and for days lay near death in the Pearl Palace, attended constantly by my mother and grandmother. I wanted to help, but my grandmother would not let me in the sick room. It was a long, weary time. Anna Dalasena retained power since my father was too ill to hold audiences or even see petitioners, and his decree making her regent while he was away was held to be in force until he could regain his strength. I was still barred from the throne room and was too distracted to spend long hours at my books. Simon was too busy for stories and would send me away. I was left with no one but Sophia. Sophia usually accompanied me to the library. I was under no illusion that she came for the joy of my company. I knew that she hoped to catch a glimpse of Malik, whom she rarely saw. At times I would pretend not to see them when they exchanged smiles or even touched hands when they thought I was not looking. But he usually would be called upon to move a box, reach a book on a high shelf, or travel into the city to pick up something that Simon had ordered, and Sophia would join me at my work table. She, of course, could not read, but she would turn over the pages of the books and look at the pictures while I studied. One of her favorites was a psalm book my father had had a Frankish monastery create for my mother. I could understand my maid's fascination with the book. The letters were more beautifully formed than I had ever seen in any other work. Most marvelous of all, every page was illustrated with paintings of angels, shepherds, mountains, blue skies, castles. I looked over to see what page held her interest for so long. She was gazing at a scene richly illustrated with an angel, golden wings spread wide, hovering over a city. Even though the whole picture was no larger than my hand, I could see the town walls, the towers, and even tiny windows in the buildings. Field outside the city, small people in clothes of many colors were bent over the ground. "What are they doing, Sophia?" I asked. "Those are farmers. They're planting crops," she answered. I looked closer. So that was what the farmers who came to plead with my grandmother were talking about. I had seen gardeners growing flowers and ornamental shrubbery, but I had never seen crops. In the picture, I didn't see anything I recognized as food. Then I noticed that some of the figures wore long dresses. How odd! There are women outside, in front of the men, with no veils on their faces. Most women wear no veils, Your Majesty. It is only in the palace and among the nobility that women must cover their faces. This was a strange thought. I had never been outside the walls of the city and rarely outside the palace, except when we moved to the Daphne Palace in summer and back to Balternay in the winter. And in the palace, a woman would just as soon appear in public without her clothes on as without a veil covering her face. "This is Constantinople," Sophia said. She went on, "See, here's Balternay Palace with your bedroom window that faces the ocean. There's the Daphne Palace, and the Church of St. Sophia, and the horse field, and you can see all the other buildings inside the compound." I bent closer, looking for a picture of myself, but I could not see any figures inside the walls. Hovering directly over the palace was an especially beautiful angel, long wings gleaming with what had to be real gold. This angel's arms were spread wide over the city. I said, an edge of contempt creeping into my voice, "And I suppose my mother would say that this is the guardian angel who is always over the city, looking after us and taking care of us." Sophia looked surprised. "Of course. Don't you believe in angels, Princess?" "I am a historian. I believe in what I can see," I said. "I have never seen an angel, nor have I read of any in my histories. And if there are guardian angels, why do they allow evil to happen? I should think that you of all people would know that." Sophia flushed. "I have had doubts," she said, "but I know that someone is helping me. How else could Malik have found me?" "Why would he have had to look for you if your village had not been destroyed?" I countered. "Where was your angel when your little sister was killed or enslaved? Where was mine when my grandmother convinced my father to name John his heir?" Sophia set her jaw stubbornly. "I don't know the answer to that," she said, "and I hope you don't let Father Agathos hear you say such things. I am not a Christian, but he says many wise things, and your mother thinks that everything he says is true. Surely you don't doubt your own mother." I did not like being interrogated by a slave, so I turned back to my book. That night, I slept fitfully. I woke up with a start in the darkness. What had I heard? Could it have been the rustle of angel wings overhead? I sat up, careful not to disturb Sophia, who was sleeping on a pallet at the foot of my bed. I listened again. Nothing. But I wanted to be sure, so I slipped out of my bed and stole to the door. Holding my breath, I carefully pushed aside the heavy hanging and slipped through the opening. I moved down the hall, my bare feet almost noiseless on the stone floor. Last time I had been in the corridor alone had been the night Malik had come to the palace. But I was older now and moved with less fear. Still, I was careful not to be discovered. I had no idea what would be my brother's reaction to this nighttime excursion. I soon found myself outside on the high battlements. A breeze stirred the air and cooled my moist cheeks. Keeping close to the wall, I craned my neck backward, scanning the sky. There was nothing. The calm stars and the moon shone steadily with no hovering angel to block them from view. I stayed as long as I dared, slipping behind stone battlements every time I heard a guard go by. Finally, shivering with cold and disappointment, I retraced my steps. As I lay awake for the rest of the night, I wondered why the psalm book had pictured something that did not exist, and why my mother spoke of our guardian angel. All I could think was that everyone had lied, and that no one was watching over me.